Husband dismissed our nanny's feeling violated as normal boy behavior, leaving me to fight alone for consequence and healing. This has been one of the most stressful and confusing moments in my life, certainly in our marriage. I never thought I'd be sitting here, struggling with a problem like this, questioning everything about the way my husband and I parent, and, honestly, about the man I married. My husband and I have been together for 13 years, and we have 2 kids, a 13-year-old son and a 2-year-old daughter. When I was pregnant with our daughter, we agreed to hire a nanny because both of us worked demanding jobs and wanted her to have someone who could provide personalized attention at home. It was important to me that whoever we brought into our home became like family, and, after a thorough search, we found the perfect fit, a young woman who's now 25. Over the 2 years she's worked for us, she's become like a second daughter. She's sensitive, playful, and incredibly sweet. My little girl is intensely attached to her, sometimes even more than she is to me. She calls her Sissy, and their bond is genuine. Because of our schedules, our nanny lives with us during the week. She has her own duplex, some privacy, and when the nights run late or we're traveling, she stays over. We have a night nanny who takes over most responsibilities at 6 p.m. if needed, otherwise our main nanny's off duty after that. Over time, we all became very comfortable and open. She really is part of the household. Things had gone smoothly until last week when I noticed she'd suddenly become distant. Less talkative, closed off, really only interacting with my daughter in her usual loving way. I tried to figure out if I'd missed something, asked my husband if he'd noticed anything, but he was just as confused as I was. Then, last Saturday, when she was out of the house on her day off, my son approached me in an obvious state of distress. He admitted he'd done something wrong. My heart sank. Somehow I already knew it had to do with our nanny. I pressed, and he told me what happened. About a week ago, he'd come home from soccer and, accidentally at first, saw our nanny undressing in her room while his baby sister napped. She eventually saw him, froze, and then told him to leave before slamming the door. I asked if he'd looked away and he hesitated, then shamefully admitted he didn't, even though he knew he should have. He confessed he couldn't look away. When I asked why he told me now, he said he felt bad and didn't want her to think he was gross or for her to say something untrue about him. Hearing this, I felt sick. I told him I appreciated his honesty, but I was upset, and I'd need to talk to his father before anything else. It all suddenly made sense. Her sudden withdrawal wasn't random. I felt an immense shame and heartbreak, especially knowing my nanny hadn't told me herself. I told my husband, expecting him to share my shock and concern, and maybe help me figure out the right way to address this. Instead, his reaction was almost dismissive. He said it was normal for a 13-year-old boy to not be able to look away, pointed out how beautiful she is, how puberty works, but said he wasn't blaming her. He insisted that for everyone's sake, we let it go to avoid creating tension in the house. That was totally unacceptable for me. I get that my son is a child and puberty is difficult, but excusing his behavior and sweeping it under the rug was out of the question. There had to be a consequence, not just for our son, but also to support our nanny. I insisted that my son needed to apologize to her, something my husband wasn't keen on. But before any steps, I needed to talk to our nanny and see how she was feeling. That conversation broke my heart. She told me she hadn't said anything because she was afraid I wouldn't believe her or she'd be fired. She even blamed herself, saying, "I should have closed the door all the way. I should have heard him come home." The guilt and shame she felt were crushing. I reassured her that she was absolutely not going to be fired, that my son had confessed, and that she was safe with us. Still, she admitted that now she can't be comfortable around him. She feels disgusted and ashamed even though she knows he's a child. She's spent 2 years driving him around, interacting with him, being part of his life. It wounds her deeply, but she doesn't blame me. I told her for now, just focus on my daughter. I'd figure out other ways to get my son to his activities, and she wouldn't have to deal with him for the time being. Now I'm stuck between my child, whom I love and know feels guilty, and a wonderful person who feels violated and unsafe in a home that's supposed to be a second home for her. But looming even bigger in my mind is my husband's reaction, his refusal to take this seriously, to join me as a team in navigating this. Every time I bring up ways to repair things or address the consequences, he shuts down. He literally told me, "Would you just let it go?" Hearing that was like a slap in the face. We're supposed to be a united front, parenting our kids together, especially during these difficult years. I counted on him to help raise our son into a respectful man, to support boundaries and values. But it feels like I'm staring at a stranger these days, someone who cares more about moving past discomfort than genuine resolution or healing. What about how our nanny feels? What about the example we set for our son? I know I need to put my foot down, for the sake of everyone in this house, but I'm at a complete loss for how to move forward with my husband. I don't want this to break the marriage, but there's no way to just ignore what's happened or how he's reacting. And, for clarity, my son didn't just peek for a few moments. He stood there for at least a minute, watching her get undressed all the way down to her underwear. He told me so. It started as an accident, but then he was curious and kept looking, which disgusts him now. He's not a bad boy, but he was leering, he knows it, and feels deeply ashamed. That's where his guilt comes from. I just wish my husband saw things the way I do and understood what's at stake, not just for our nanny, but for our son, for our family, and for us. Update 1. He did apologize for how he shut me down, which I genuinely appreciated, but he was still hesitant that anything else needed to be done. I had to ask him why he thought that, why he believed our son shouldn't apologize, and whether he truly understood our nanny's feelings. He told me, plainly, that he was struggling to believe our son really did something like that. He just couldn't see him as anything other than the sweet boy he'd always known, even though he admitted he'd noticed a change in him as he entered adolescence. I acknowledged how hard this was for him but pointed out, this is our reality now, our son is changing and will continue to change. If we want him to grow into a better person, we need to address these moments, as a team, as his parents. I reminded him that our son had come to me first with his confession, and that I had to practically pry the truth out of the nanny because she was so distraught. I hit home with how similar circumstances in my own past affected me, something I'd shared with him before, and how empathetic he'd always been. But this time, he insisted this was different. With me, it was a guy around my own age, and, according to him, our nanny shouldn't allow herself to be so affected by such a young boy. That stunned me. I asked outright if he cared at all about how she was feeling. Of course I do, he said, but insisted that anything other than a literal say sorry to your nanny was asking too much. I couldn't believe how dismissive he was. This wasn't typical of him at all. At that moment, I made up my mind. No matter his reluctance, I had to do what was right, not just for our son, but for our daughter as well. I need to be the example, especially for my little girl, who will be facing a world that still judges women harshly for things beyond their control. Before talking to our son, I sat down privately with the nanny, sharing what I intended to do and making sure she was comfortable with it. She told me she was, but she asked if we could install a few cameras in her duplex. I immediately agreed, and suggested adding one in our main hallway, where all the bedroom doors are. She passes there a lot whenever she's in the baby's room, which is near my son's. I even offered to hire a personal driver to shuttle our son, until she felt more at ease. She agreed this would help. I repeated to her, firmly, that her safety and comfort mattered most, and that we were going to have a conversation with him. So, the following evening, we sat down with our son. We stressed how inappropriate his actions were, and that he genuinely owed her an apology. But I didn't want to force a meaningless apology. I wanted a real reaction, to see if he truly understood, if he grasped why it mattered, and if outside influences had anything to do with it. My husband was visibly frustrated. When I asked our son how he'd feel if something similar happened to his sister, or to me, a look of anger crossed his face. He admitted he'd feel protective. I told him some of my own story, not every detail, but enough to show him it's real, it has an impact. He had no idea how to respond. Then, I explained who the nanny is, not just a caregiver, but someone's daughter, someone's child, someone's sissy. Adults aren't immune to hurtful actions just because a child is behind them. I told our son how much his actions hurt her, that she loves his sister deeply, but even considered leaving our home, so uncomfortable and hurt she felt. She even feared losing her job if he twisted the story. That, he confessed, was why he'd said he was afraid of what she might say earlier. He feared being labeled a creep. I asked how his little sister would feel if her favorite person suddenly just left, because of something intentional he did. He admitted that she would be deeply sad, even scared. My focus wasn't to shame, but to encourage empathy and critical thought, to show him his actions ripple out. I think my words got through to him. He agreed to write a letter of apology, which made me hopeful. After the talk, my husband wanted a private word. He was not happy. He felt I had been too hard, and had just made the whole, already awkward situation worse. Wasn't the camera and driver enough? He asked me. I pressed him, did he think ignoring it would have made things less awkward? What exactly did I say that was so wrong? He couldn't answer, just grumbled that things would likely calm down in a week or so. I had to draw the line. I would not let this sort of behavior slide. If he was going to be permissive, I would be hard on our son, even if I had to do it alone. When our nanny read the letter, she was touched, and spoke kindly to our son. She told him she wasn't angry, wouldn't treat him differently, but she was still uncomfortable and hurt. She hoped he'd never do anything like this to another girl or woman. He apologized again and she smiled. Things between them won't go back entirely to how they were, but there's no grudge. I can see she's much more comfortable now with the new arrangements, and our son knows not to speak about her in any vulgar way with friends. I even checked his phone photos, just to be safe, thanks to a concern she'd voiced. But this isn't just about our son. The conversation with my husband is ongoing. His views surprised me. He isn't rude or outright dismissive to the nanny, but he can't see past his own image of our son as the good boy. He's still struggling to accept these changes, but I will keep showing him why they matter until he truly understands. I'm proud that I stood up for my values, proud to be the parent my kids need, even if sometimes it means I have to act on my own. I'll keep a close eye on any other questionable attitudes my husband may have, but I can already see a shift in his understanding. No matter what, I will never shy away from correcting this behavior if it appears again. Update 2. I thought things were finally settling down after the apology letter and new arrangements. Our nanny seemed more comfortable, my son was keeping his distance respectfully, and even my husband appeared to be coming around, or so I thought. But last Thursday, everything shifted again in a way I never saw coming. It started when I came home early from work with a migraine. I'd texted everyone that I was heading home, but apparently my husband didn't see the message. I walked into the house around 2 p.m., expecting to find peace and quiet since my daughter was supposed to be napping and our nanny usually uses the time to do light housework or rest herself. Instead, I heard voices coming from the kitchen, my husband's voice and our nanny's, but they were speaking quietly, almost intimately. I froze in the hallway, not wanting to interrupt what seemed like a serious conversation, but something about their tone made my stomach drop. I couldn't make out full sentences, but I heard her say something like, "I don't know if I can keep doing this," and his response was, "You don't have to worry about her reaction." When I walked into the kitchen, they both jumped apart. Not physically, they weren't touching, but the energy in the room was charged in a way that made me feel like I was intruding. My husband looked guilty, almost panicked, and our nanny's face was flushed. She mumbled something about needing to check on the baby and practically fled upstairs. What was that about? I asked my husband directly. He brushed it off, saying she was just still upset about the situation with our son and he was trying to reassure her. When I pressed him about what he meant by "you don't have to worry about her reaction," he claimed I must have misheard. But I know what I heard, and more importantly, I know my husband. After 13 years together, I can read his body language, and he was lying. Over the next few days, I started noticing things I'd been too distracted to see before. Little interactions between them that seemed different. He'd linger in conversations with her longer than necessary. She'd smile at him in a way that felt too warm, too personal. When he'd come home from work, he'd seek her out first, ostensibly to ask about our daughter, but their exchanges felt charged. The breaking point came yesterday. I was putting laundry away in our bedroom when I heard them talking in the hallway again. This time, I positioned myself where I could actually listen. "We can't keep having these conversations," she was saying. "It's not fair to anyone." "I know," my husband replied, and his voice had this tender quality I recognized. "It's how he used to talk to me when we were dating. But I can't stop thinking about what you said the other night." My blood turned to ice. What other night? When had they been having private conversations that I didn't know about? "She's been so focused on what happened with son's name," our nanny continued, "but she has no idea that the real problem is." I couldn't hear the rest because our daughter started crying from her room, and they both moved away quickly. I spent the entire night lying awake, replaying every interaction I could remember. The way my husband had been so dismissive about the incident with our son, was it because he was more focused on protecting our nanny than I realized? The way he'd minimized her feelings publicly but then seemed to be having private heart-to-hearts with her? How long had this been going on? This morning, while my husband was at work and our nanny was out with our daughter at the park, I did something I never thought I'd do. I checked his phone. His recent messages were mostly normal, but there was a text thread with her that made my hands shake. The messages were from 3 nights ago, the night of the conversation she'd referenced. They weren't explicitly romantic, but they were definitely inappropriate. Messages like, "I keep thinking about what you said tonight, and this situation is more complicated than she realizes and I wish things were different." Her responses were just as concerning. "I never expected to feel this way and we have to be careful." I screenshotted everything before I lost my nerve, then sat in our bedroom trying to process what this meant. Is my husband having an emotional affair with our nanny? Has it gone further than that? Was his dismissive attitude about our son's behavior actually him deflecting because he's been having inappropriate thoughts about her himself? When she came back with our daughter, I watched them interact with fresh eyes. There's definitely something there, an undercurrent of tension and familiarity that goes beyond employer-employee or even the family-like relationship I thought we'd built. I confronted her this afternoon after our daughter went down for her nap. I kept it gentle but direct. "I've noticed you and my husband seem to have gotten closer lately. Is there something I should know about?" She went completely pale and started stammering about how they'd just been talking about the situation with our son. But when I mentioned the text messages, she broke down crying. She admitted that over the past few weeks, their conversations had gotten too personal and that she'd started developing feelings she knew were inappropriate. She swore nothing physical had happened, but acknowledged that the emotional connection was confusing for both of them. "I should leave," she kept repeating. "I never wanted this to happen. I love this family." I'm sitting here now, waiting for my husband to come home, with printed copies of the text messages and a decision to make. Our son's behavior crisis has somehow revealed something much deeper and more threatening to our marriage. The woman I trusted like a daughter, who I defended and protected, has been emotionally involved with my husband while living in our home and caring for our children. I don't know if I'm more angry at her or at him. She's young, she's been dealing with a traumatic situation, and she's isolated from her own support system living here with us during the week. He's a 42-year-old married man who should know better. But I also can't shake the feeling that there's still more to this story. The way she phrased things, the references to conversations I wasn't aware of, I'm starting to wonder if my husband's initial reaction to our son's behavior wasn't about boys being boys at all. Maybe it was about his own guilt over the way he'd been looking at her himself. Tonight, we're going to have the conversation that might end our marriage. I just hope I'm strong enough to handle whatever truth comes out. Update 3. The conversation I'd been dreading finally happened last night, and I'm still reeling from what came out. Nothing could have prepared me for the full scope of what's been going on under my own roof. When my husband got home, I was sitting at the kitchen table with the printed text messages spread out in front of me. He walked in, saw them, and his face went completely white. For a moment, he just stood there in the doorway, and I could see him calculating what to say. "We need to talk," I said simply, gesturing to the chair across from me. He sat down heavily and immediately started with the deflection I'd expected. "This isn't what it looks like." Nothing physical happened, but when I told him I'd already spoken to our nanny and gotten her side, something shifted in his expression. The defensive posture crumbled, and what came out next shattered everything I thought I knew about the past month. The emotional affair had been going on for 3 weeks, since right after the incident with our son. But here's the part that made my stomach turn. My husband admitted that our son's behavior had triggered something in him that he'd been trying to suppress for months. He'd been attracted to our nanny for far longer than he'd let himself acknowledge, and seeing our son act on those same impulses had forced him to confront his own feelings. "When you were so focused on teaching him about respect and boundaries," he said, barely meeting my eyes, "all I could think about was how I'd been having the same thoughts he acted on." I felt like such a hypocrite. The private conversations between them had started as him apologizing for the situation with our son, but quickly became him confessing his own inappropriate feelings. She'd apparently been struggling with her own attraction to him, something that had developed slowly over the 2 years she'd been with us, but had intensified recently as she watched him be such a devoted father and husband. The night I'd overheard them referencing was when things had almost crossed a physical line. They'd been talking in the hallway after everyone had gone to bed, and according to my husband, they'd ended up standing too close and had almost kissed before she pulled away and said they couldn't keep doing this. But then he told me something that made everything even worse. Our nanny had apparently confided in him that our son's incident wasn't the first time something like that had happened. A few months ago, she'd caught him trying to look down her shirt when she was helping our daughter with something on the floor. She hadn't said anything because she'd convinced herself it was accidental and didn't want to create problems. "She felt like she couldn't tell you because you'd already been so stressed with work," my husband said. "And then when I became someone she could talk to about it." I was speechless. Our son had a pattern of inappropriate behavior that I'd been completely unaware of. Our nanny had been dealing with this alone for months, and instead of coming to me, his wife, the mother of his children, my husband had used her vulnerability to build an emotional connection that had nearly destroyed our marriage. I asked him point blank, "Do you have feelings for her?" The pause before he answered told me everything. "Yes," he finally said. "But I love you. I love our family. I never wanted this to happen." We talked until almost 3 a.m. He swore that nothing physical had happened beyond almost kissing, but admitted that if I hadn't come home early that day, he thinks it might have eventually. He also revealed that our nanny had been the one trying to maintain boundaries. She'd suggested multiple times that maybe she should find another position, but he'd convinced her to stay. This morning, I had another conversation with our nanny while my husband took our daughter to daycare. We'd agreed she needed a day off to figure things out. She confirmed everything my husband had told me, but added details that made it even more complicated. She admitted she'd developed feelings for my husband months ago, but had convinced herself they were just because he reminded her of her own father, who died when she was young. The way he interacted with our children, his patience and kindness, had awakened something she didn't know how to handle. When the incident with our son happened, my husband's support and understanding had made those feelings impossible to ignore. "I know how this looks," she said through tears. "I know you probably think I'm some young homewrecker, but I never wanted to hurt your family. I love your children like they're my own." She also told me that our son had made another inappropriate comment to her just last week, something about how pretty she looked in her pajamas when she'd come downstairs early one morning. She'd been planning to tell me, but then everything with my husband had gotten so complicated that she didn't know how to bring up another problem. Now I'm sitting here with my daughter napping upstairs, trying to figure out what to do next. I have a 13-year-old son who apparently has ongoing issues with appropriate behavior toward women that I've been blind to. I have a husband who's been emotionally cheating with our nanny and lying to my face about it for weeks. And I have a young woman who I trusted completely, who's been keeping secrets about my son's behavior and developing feelings for my husband. The most heartbreaking part? Through all of this, the person I feel worst for is our nanny. She's young, she's been living in our home dealing with unwanted attention from both my husband and my son, and she's been trying to navigate impossible situations without any real support system. Yes, she made poor choices, but she's also been put in an incredibly difficult position. I told her this morning that she needs to find another position. Not because I'm angry with her, but because this situation has become too complicated for everyone involved. She agreed and said she'd already started looking. We're going to help her find something good, it's the least we can do. As for my husband, I honestly don't know. Part of me wants to fight for our marriage, especially for our children's sake. But I can't stop thinking about how easily he lied to me, how he used our son's crisis as cover for his own inappropriate behavior, and how he was willing to risk everything we've built together. We're starting couples counseling next week. I've also scheduled individual therapy for our son to address his ongoing behavior issues. Clearly, our family approach isn't working and he needs professional help. I keep wondering how I missed so many signs. How long has this dysfunction been brewing in my own home? And how do I rebuild trust with a husband who's proven he can look me in the eye and lie about something this significant? Right now, I'm just taking things one day at a time and trying to protect my children through what's shaping up to be the most challenging period of our family's life. Update 4. I thought I was prepared for how difficult the next few weeks would be, but I severely underestimated how quickly everything would continue to unravel. The couple's counseling session I mentioned? We never made it there. 3 days after my last update, I came home from dropping our daughter at daycare to find my husband packing a suitcase in our bedroom. My heart stopped. I thought he was leaving us, but when I asked what he was doing, he told me something that turned my world upside down again. "She's pregnant," he said without looking up from folding his shirts. "Our nanny is pregnant." I literally had to sit down on the bed. The room started spinning. "What do you mean she's pregnant? You said nothing physical happened." That's when the rest of the truth came out. The almost kiss in the hallway? It had gone further than he'd admitted. They'd been physical exactly once, about 2 weeks before I discovered their text messages. It happened late one night when our daughter had been sick and our nanny had stayed over to help. I'd gone to bed early with a headache, leaving them downstairs together. "It was just that one time," he kept repeating, as if that made it better. We both immediately regretted it. That's why she kept saying we had to stop, because we'd already crossed the line. I felt like I was going to vomit. "And you're sure it's yours?" He nodded miserably. "She hasn't been with anyone else. She told me yesterday." Our nanny had apparently taken a pregnancy test after missing her period and had gone straight to my husband with the results. They'd spent the previous evening discussing what to do while I was at book club, completely oblivious to the fact that my life was about to implode again. But here's where it gets even more complicated. She doesn't want to keep the baby, but she's scared to go through it alone. And my husband, the man I've been married to for 13 years, told her he'd support whatever decision she made, including going with her to appointments if needed. "So where are you going with that suitcase?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "To a hotel," he said. "Just for a few days, to give you space to process this. I know how this looks, but I need you to know that I don't have feelings for her anymore. This whole situation has made me realize how much I could lose." I laughed bitterly. "You already lost it. The moment you slept with the woman caring for our children in our house, you lost it." After he left, I called in sick to work and spent the day in a daze. I couldn't stop thinking about all the times I'd come home to find them together with our daughter, how natural and family-like it had seemed. Had they been looking at each other differently during those moments? Had my daughter picked up on any tension? That evening, our nanny came to me. She looked terrible, pale, exhausted, and like she'd been crying for days. She confirmed everything my husband had told me and then said something that broke my heart all over again. "I know you probably hate me," she said, "but I need you to know that I never planned for any of this. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you, and now with this." She gestured vaguely at her stomach. "I can't stay here anymore. It's not fair to anyone." I surprised myself by not feeling angry at her in that moment. Maybe I was too emotionally exhausted, or maybe I genuinely felt sorry for her. She's 25 years old, living away from her family, and now pregnant by her married employer. Whatever poor choices she made, her life is about to be turned upside down too. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I don't know," she admitted. "I love kids, but having one like this, it would complicate everything forever, but I also don't know if I can go through with the alternative." We sat in silence for a while, and then she asked me something I never expected. "Can I ask you what you did when you found out you were pregnant with daughter's name? You were so excited, and I remember thinking about how ready you seemed." The question caught me off guard because the truth is, I wasn't ready when I found out about our daughter. My husband and I had been going through a rough patch, ironically, because I suspected he'd been too friendly with a coworker. We'd been in counseling then too. The pregnancy had actually saved our marriage that time, giving us something positive to focus on together. I shared this with her, and she started crying harder. "I keep thinking about how your daughter calls me sissy, and how much I love her, and how this ruins everything. She's going to lose me either way." That's when it hit me how much this was going to affect our daughter. She's going to wake up one day soon and her favorite person will just be gone, with no explanation she can understand. The next morning, my husband called asking if we could meet for coffee to talk. Against my better judgment, I agreed. He looked awful, unshaven, exhausted, wearing the same clothes from the day before. "I know I've destroyed everything," he started, "but I need you to know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this. I'll go to therapy, I'll be completely transparent about everything, Stop, I interrupted. "You can't fix this. You had sex with our nanny, got her pregnant, and lied to me about it for weeks. While I was trying to teach our son about respecting women, you were busy disrespecting me in the worst possible way." He was quiet for a long moment, then said, "She's not going to keep it. So in a few weeks, this part of it will be over, and maybe we can start to heal." I stared at him in disbelief. "You think her having an abortion is going to make this disappear? You think I'll just forget that you created a whole other life while betraying our family?" But then he said something that made me realize there's even more going on here. "She asked me to go with her to the appointment. She doesn't have anyone else. And are you going too?" "I think I have too," he said. "She's going through this because of me. I'm writing this now from our house, which feels emptier than it ever has. Our nanny is upstairs packing the last of her things. She's staying with a friend until she figures out her next steps. My husband is still at his hotel. Our son keeps asking where everyone went, and I don't know what to tell him. Our daughter keeps looking for her sissy and crying when she can't find her. Tomorrow, my husband is going with our former nanny to a clinic 2 hours away. He asked if I wanted to know when it was happening, and I told him no. But now I can't stop thinking about it. I've been wondering if there are other things I don't know yet. How long had he really been attracted to her? Were there other times they were physical that he still hasn't admitted to? And what about our son? How much of the dysfunction in our house had he picked up on? Speaking of our son, he actually asked me yesterday if our nanny left because of what he did. The guilt in his eyes was heartbreaking. I assured him it wasn't his fault, but I realized that in some twisted way, his behavior might have been him acting out what he was subconsciously picking up on from his father. I have no idea what happens next. I can't imagine forgiving my husband, but I also can't imagine breaking up our family. And despite everything, I'm worried about our nanny going through this alone, which makes me feel like I'm losing my mind. The only thing I know for certain is that the family I thought I had doesn't exist anymore, and I'm not sure any of us will ever be the same.